Good morning, this is Justin Wells from Self-Advocacy Champions and this is Stories of the Titanic. Today, we are going to talk about the story of Charles Yadkin, the chief baker on board the Titanic. Charles Yadkin was the chief baker on the Titanic. He also served on other White Star Line ships as well, including the Titanic's elder sister, the RMS Olympic. Charles Yadkin has a very unique survival story on board the Titanic. His mission was not only to help save lives on board the Titanic, but to also save as much alcohol on board the doomed ship as possible before she sank on the night of Sunday, April 14, 1912. Charles Yadkin's cabin was located aft on the Titanic on E-deck along the Scotland Road corridor. Scotland Road is a corridor on E-deck on the port side that spans the entire length of the Titanic. Charles' cabin was beside the first smokestack. Charles Harkin had many friends who worked for the White Star Line, including Captain Smith, First Officer William Murdoch, and Thomas Andrews. On the Titanic maiden voyage, Thomas Andrews felt homesick when he had to leave Ireland. Charles Yadkin made Thomas Andrews feel like he was home by baking Thomas Andrews some Irish soda bread so Thomas Andrews would feel more at home whenever he had to leave his home country of Ireland behind. On the night of Sunday, April 14, 1912, something terrible happened. The RMS Titanic struck an iceberg on the starboard side, opening up the Titanic's hull that spanned 6 of her 16 watertight compartments. The iceberg didn't cause a massive 300-foot gash on the Titanic's hull on the starboard side. The iceberg caused a series of smaller gashes along the Titanic's hull and sea water to get inside the ship. Charles' cabin was on E-deck along the aft side of the Titanic along the Scotland Road corridor. When the Titanic hit the iceberg, he testified that he felt the iceberg collision pretty strongly. Throughout the sinking, Charles Yadkin was put in charge of lifeboat number 10 on the port side. Inside the Titanic, he encountered several third-class women and he pointed them which direction to take to get to the boat deck to the Titanic lifeboats. He then returned to his cabin to get a drink of whiskey he stored inside his cabin before returning to the boat deck to lifeboat number 10. As soon as he got to lifeboat number 10, he saw Chief Officer Henry Wilde being very harsh with some of the Titanic's male passengers. Charles told him that there's no way to be harsh to the men. There was no panic or chaos around these men. He then returned inside the ship and continued to show women and children which way it was to get to the boat deck to the lifeboats, and then went to his cabin to get another drink. As the sinking of the Titanic continued to play out, Charles encountered some third-class women and children who were hanging out inside the ship. They had no intention of leaving the Titanic, so he forcefully brought them up onto the Titanic's boat deck so they could board a lifeboat. As the sinking continued to progress, the Titanic's bow was nearly underwater. Water began flooding the interior spaces of the Titanic really fast. Charles Yadkin's cabin was located aft of the Titanic on E-deck along the Scotland Road corridor. When he got to Scotland Road, he was seeing a massive wall of water completely flooded the Scotland Road corridor inside the ship. But that did not stop Charles from getting his drink. He still went inside to his cabin to get another drink, but by the time he got there, he testified that water was up to his ankles when he returned to his cabin. But even though his cabin was underwater, Charles still went inside to get his drink. And as soon as he got onto the Titanic boat deck, lifeboat 10 has already left the Titanic. There was nothing left for Charles to do. So Charles Yadkin began throwing deck chairs into the water so he could make sure that people had something to cling to after the Titanic foundered. Later, he then proceeded to the A-deck pantry to get another drink. Charles Yadkin was definitely pretty buzzed at this late in the sinking. While he was at the A-deck pantry to get another drink, he said that he suddenly heard loud groaning and bubbling along the Titanic itself and he heard people shouting and screaming as they were headed to the Titanic's stern. What he heard was the Titanic's hull failing, so he knew that he had to escape the A-deck pantry. He went to the Titanic's stern as the Titanic's giant propellers slowly rose out of the frigid water. He then held onto the railing on the aft starboard side as the Titanic stern rose higher out of the water until the Titanic stern reached a 24-degree angle out of the water. Suddenly a loud explosion echoed throughout the Titanic. The Titanic slowed down and the ship broke in two just in front of the wooden smoke stack. Charles Yadkin was thrown off his feet as the Titanic's stern crashed into the water almost leveled. As soon as the Titanic's stern climbed perpendicular to the water, Charles hung onto the railing and the Titanic started sinking. He then tightened his belt while he held onto the Titanic as the stern stood up vertically to the water. Then at 2:20 on Monday, April 15, 1912, the Titanic's stern slowly sank from under us. As soon as the water reached Charles, he swam away from the sinking Titanic as the ship disappeared beneath the surface. After the Titanic went down, Charles Yadkin was in the freezing cold water for around 2 hours. The alcohol he consumed throughout the sinking made his body feel numb to the cold. The water temperature on the night the Titanic sank was 28 degrees Fahrenheit or -2 degrees Celsius. The average life expectancy in water that cold was less than 15 minutes. Charles Yadkin was in the freezing water for around 2 hours before finding collapsible lifeboat B. As soon as he got to collapsible lifeboat B, he then partially lifted himself onto the overturned lifeboat, lifting his core body out of the water. As the morning dragged on, another lifeboat approached the overturned collapsible lifeboat B and